Thanks for the download. Usual admin before we start the episode. It'd be great if you could rate the podcast on Spotify or iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts from, as this helps me know how well we're doing and also brings it to the attention of potential listeners. If you want to support the podcast, the best way to do this is via the Buy Me a Coffee link in the show notes. I'm grateful for recent contributors helping keep production costs to the minimum. On this episode, I'll be discussing jungle warfare with Kev, and we cover how Britain transformed its army into an effective jungle fighting force in World War II after an inauspicious start, why jungle warfare training is relevant in the 21st century. We outline Exercise Iron Lance, which was a typical jungle training course in the early 90s, run by instructors from 22 SAS. And finally, we take a look at two books: the classic The Jungle is Neutral by Freddy Spencer Chapman, and Jungle Soldier, The True Story of Freddy Spencer Chapman, which is a biography by Brian Moynahan. Let's crack on. For decades, the British Army has been training its soldiers to fight in dense, unforgiving rainforests, from the jungles of Malaysia to the swamps of Central America. And on this pod, we'll talk about jungle warfare and training, and why it remains critical in modern military operations. But I'm going to start with a quote first. The term jungle craft implies the ability of a soldier to live and fight in the jungle, to be able to move from point to point and arrive at his objective fit to fight, to use ground and vegetation to the best advantage, and be able to melt into the jungle either by freezing or intelligent use of camouflage, to recognise and be able to use native foods, and possess the ability to erect rapid temporary shelters to ward off tropical downpours. A jungle soldier should be sufficiently well versed in jungle lore to recognise instantly the cry or call of disturbed birds. His ears should be attuned to normal jungle noises in order that he may detect foreign or man-made sounds. He must learn to rely on his observation of broken twigs and branches, of trampled undergrowth, and of disturbed mould, to detect the recent presence or proximity of humans. He must use his sense of smell. It is a curious fact that the Japanese soldier possesses a peculiar unpleasant odour which is most persistent. He must readily recognise the dangers of tracks converging at either watering places or gardens and approach such areas with caution. He must learn to move through the jungle in darkness and be able to retrace his steps. He must learn to move silently, to avoid stepping on rotting logs and twigs, and otherwise give away his presence to the enemy. In short, the jungle is the home of the jungle soldier, and the sooner he learns to feel at home there, the better. And that quote comes from the Jungle Book, Military Training Pamphlet number 9, 4th edition, dated September 43. So you've operated in the jungles of Belize and Brunei and other places, Kev. And do you think that description was still applicable during your time?
Yeah, I do. I think what they're talking about is the presence of you in the jungle. Yeah, you're going to lose sign, you're going to lose smell. And we spent an enormous amount of time in the training phases in how to do the minimum amount of sign, how to spot sign, to be able to identify what looks normal, what looks abnormal. Smells were a big thing. Anything from you've got fresh into the jungle, you've still got a smell of soap and your clothing's whatever's been detergent used to do the clothing. Depending on your rations, because obviously Western rations and everyone else's rations all give off a smell when you're cooking it, but also when you eat it, and obviously when you defecate in the jungle as well, that can give off an odour as well.
And that's what he was hinting about there. He said Japanese, because they ate a lot of fish.
So the diet would reflect that, and that leaves a smell, and that smell will last days. And so when you're moving through the jungle, you will will tune in very quickly to the noises, to the smell of the jungle, which is quite a stench, but you will pick up unnatural or man-made smells as well. Once you tune in, it takes a few days, but once you tune in and your clothing no longer smells, your soap gone away and all the rest of it, and you just smell of sweat, but sweat gives off a smell as well.
It's interesting because post-World War II, the British Army developed a reputation for being good jungle fighters. But at the start of the war, this wasn't the case, and we were constantly outfought with the Japanese. And then the nadir was probably the fall of Singapore in 1942, when a garrison of around 80,000 surrendered to a Japanese force of 30,000. And it really took until the battles of Kohima and the admin box in 1944 that marked a major turning point for the British Army. So our first discussion point is what made these battles so significant, and more importantly, how did the British transform from suffering devastating defeats early in the war to achieving major victories in the jungles of Burma?
So the defensive and jungle warfare adaptations. The British Army learned quickly that traditional European-style warfare and warfare in Africa, in North Africa, wouldn't work in the dense jungles of Burma. Instead, they made crucial adaptations to their tactics. At Kohima, British and Indian troops built strong defensive positions using trenches and bunkers, interlocking fields of fire to hold off superior Japanese numbers. They also stopped relying on traditional front lines and prepared for situations where they might be surrounded or overrun, just like at admin box. Troops also used the jungle terrain to their advantage, setting up ambushes, making use of high ground, and learned to fight in the difficult, humid, and often disease-ridden conditions. But I think it's important to remember that the battles in Kohima, admin box, and throughout the jungle campaign were meters from each other. So the front lines were meters, and I think we talk about it a bit later when they talk about Kohima, the Battle of the Tennis Court. And when you're going to get a charge or rush from the Japanese, you've only got 20 or 30 meters before they're on you. So
Psychological effect.
Absolutely, and that was ongoing all the time. So it wasn't like, even in the First World War, the trenches were quite a distance away. You had that, and you had obstacles, barbed wire and everything else. These were within grenade throwing distance.
And again, that psychological effect, because you talk about the Japanese bayonet charges there, those Banzai charges were infamous for their ability to break units.
Yeah.
Even to this day, the British Army still trains with bayonets because of the psychological effect.
Yeah, and we talked about this during the Korean War. The North Koreans and the Chinese still did mass bayonet charges against the UN troops.
What they had to also teach them was that traditional, this is the front line, and we already sort of mentioned it earlier, there was no front lines really.
No, it was on the drift.
Hands get used to being surrounded. They had to get used to the fact that everybody had to fight, from the clerks, cooks.
Yeah.
Everybody had to be able to pick up a rifle and fight, and getting that whole change of mindset was key.
Absolutely.
But the other area was air supply and logistics, and this is where you start seeing sort of warfare that we are more used to come into play. And one of the most game-changing factors in these battles was the use of air power for resupply. So instead of being cut off and starved into surrender, which was a key Japanese tactic, the British forces at Kohima and the admin box received food, ammunition and medical supplies via air. This not only kept them in the fight, but also gave them a crucial psychological advantage. Another major shift was casualty evacuation by air as well. Wounded soldiers were flown out instead of being left behind, which meant troops could fight knowing that they had a chance of survival if injured. At the same time, the British worked to disrupt Japanese supply lines, which were often overstretched. And the Japanese were a bit of a locust army. They travelled extremely light, which meant they could travel very, very fast. But they relied on what they could capture or steal from the local population of the armies they were conquering. The Japanese were used to outlasting their opponents, but here they are the ones struggling to maintain supplies.
Jungle warfare is all about logistics, all about admin. Spend an enormous amount of time looking for the enemy. To survive in that environment, you need a massive amount of support. It's difficult to get to you. I think during the Second World War, when they started doing the airdrops, that was a game changer for the British, Indian, and the Commonwealth soldiers, and for the Americans who also adopted the same process.
What needs to be brought out, and is often forgotten about, was the huge contribution by the Indian Army.
Yes.
They made up a massive amount of troops that fought in the Far East. Key to this, then, was leadership and morale. And a major reason for this turnaround was the leadership of General William Slim, commander of the British 14th Army. And he focused on building morale, self-sufficiency and resilience. He trained his men to fight to the end rather than expecting retreat or surrender if surrounded. His belief in aggressive, adaptable tactics helped reshape the army into a much more effective fighting force. So after suffering serious setbacks in Burma in 1942, the British had learned valuable lessons. No longer would they be pushed back easily, and their new approach emphasised self-sufficiency, holding ground, and striking back when possible. That extract I read at the start of the pod was from a training manual greatly rewritten by Captain Edgar Peacock in 1943. He condemned the jungle training methods which had seen the British Army run out of Burma in 1942, and he instructed 7th Indian Division in India prior to their impressive performance at the Battle of the Admin Box. Within 2 years he'd been promoted to Lieutenant Colonel and was leading the most spectacularly successful jungle warfare campaign of World War II, Operation Character, where he won a DSO and an MC in the process. Character was a British-led military campaign during World War II conducted by SOE and Force 136 in Japanese-occupied Burma in 1945. The mission aimed to support local Karen guerrilla fighters, disrupt Japanese supply lines, and weaken enemy control through sabotage, ambushes, and intelligence gathering. The operation was highly effective, resulting in an estimated 10,000 Japanese casualties, primarily through guerrilla warfare tactics. By coordinating with resistant forces, Operation Character played a crucial role in the Burma campaign, significantly harassing Japanese forces and aiding the eventual Allied recapture of Burma. So I'm hoping to get a podcast recorded in a couple of months with Peacock's grandson about a new book coming out in June called Jungle Warrior. So it'll be good for me and Kev to get to know a little bit more about that, because I think Peacock has been overshadowed by the likes of the Chindits. I mean, I hadn't heard of him until recently, but you're quite into like Force 136 and all that, aren't you?
Well, but I never heard of Peacock himself, but I think it was the SOE at 136. Obviously, it was mentioned in the Bridge over the River Kwai and that sort of stuff, and they were working with various groups as guerrilla fighters, and I think they worked closely in hand with, obviously, remember we talked about Sea-Watch before, with the Australian observation groups who were watching the Japanese fleets.
That was stay behind.
Yeah, on the islands. I think, like you said earlier, the significant part was the work he'd done with the Indian divisions, who then successfully beat the Japanese. And I think that was the turning point, because for some reason the British have got, like I say, they become a mystique force. The Japanese become this magical force rather than just actually sticking to the basics, because that's what they did. They stuck to the basics. And also the regime the Japanese soldier was working under, well, they couldn't go backwards because they would have been treated harshly by their own side. So actually they had no other opportunity but to go forwards. I think the British Army in the Far East, the Forgotten Army as it will be described, there were a lot of disadvantages. A lot of the equipment was older, because obviously the European campaign sucked up most of the money, most of the resources, from armoured divisions to all the aircraft. So they were lightly supported. Obviously, there were a lot of maritime. But also, we'd probably psych ourselves out.
You just mentioned how the Japanese army is motivated through coercion and fear a lot of the time. The fact that it was drummed into them that surrender was a disgrace, and a lot of them, it was very rare you took a Japanese prisoner, whereas the British army was a citizens' army.
Yeah.
And that's why Slim's leadership and the way he made them confident in themselves, the fact that they would get a Kazivac, they wouldn't have to be left in the jungle to die. So you have to motivate a citizen army totally different to you have to motivate a dictatorship army.
And also, everyone forgets the Japanese have been fighting to the mid-30s.
Oh, in China and...
in other places. So this wasn't a new campaign. This was just another part of their overall campaign, because they're in Korea.
And they were a militaristic society.
Yeah, they were in Korea, they were in China. So they've already been fighting for many years in this environment. So they professionalised their skill sets more. They got used to that environment and fighting against, the Chinese army, which would have been quite large, and other armies as well. So the British were just another army to fight. It wasn't just like it started in 1940, in 1939, 1940, and the Japanese decided to start their expansion. They were already at this. The battles of Kohima and Admin Box also highlighted key tactical changes. Instead of allowing the Japanese to overrun their positions, British and Indian troops fought from well-prepared defensive strongholds. One of the biggest surprises for the Japanese came at Admin Box, where the British used tanks in jungle warfare. something previously thought impossible. These tanks played a crucial role in breaking Japanese attacks and shifting momentum of battle. There was also a big improvement in infantry coordination, with better communication between artillery, infantry and air support. So today's world, the combined operation. Instead of fighting in isolation, British and Indian troops worked together more effectively than ever before. And this went somewhere about, we just talked about it, breaking the myth of the Japanese invincibility. For a long time, the Japanese have been seen as an almost unstoppable force in jungle warfare. But these battles proved otherwise. At Kohima, British and Indian soldiers held out siege-like conditions for weeks, refusing to break despite repeated attacks. This battle showed the Japanese could be defeated in close combat, which I think once you've done it, it breaks the myth. Everyone starts getting more and more confident across all the Commonwealth troops as well, because we always forget that in other islands and other areas, we've got the Australians, we've got New Zealand's, we've got obviously the Indians, the Gurkhas were involved in this as well. So once you get one group who can do it, everyone thinks, I can do it, we can do it, and that changes the whole your own force ethos as well.
You get an offensive spirit, don't you?
And rather than just defending, British forces launched counterattacks whenever possible, catching the Japanese off guard. And this comes back to a little bit we talked about in the past about the Chindits and how successful they were, and maybe militarily not as successful with numbers and holding ground. But I think it was that force projection. It was the ability to move mass troops behind someone else's lines and starting to impact the Japanese morale.
In some ways, you could compare it, I think, to the rise of the commando forces in Europe.
Yeah.
And that was because it was the only way we could strike back.
Absolutely. And
showing that we could do something.
And we've talked about this in the Cold War style and the stay behind pieces. You then have to start guarding your rear areas, which means you've got less fighters at the front, because you've got to now protect all your other key points because they are very vulnerable. So you have to take resources from, sometimes very scant resources on the front line. You're drawing away some of your best troops to guard the HQs, to guard the artillery, to guard the logistical chain if you can get hold of it, the airfields. Because if you don't, you lose that. The front line's got absolutely nothing left.
And I remember reading a book recently, I can't remember which one it was, but it was about the admin box battle. And what the British and the Commonwealth troops quickly realised was the Japanese weren't that inventive. There's one particular passage where a guy that fought there recalls that the Japanese launched an attack up a dried up riverbed and it got defeated. Then the next day they did another attack. Same result. The next day they did the same. So there was no initiative shown to go and flank or whatever. They would just continue using the same banzai charge tactics and getting mowed down. So both battles marked major turning points in the Burma campaign. At Kohima, the Japanese eventually pushed back, ending their offensive into India. And at the admin box, the Japanese failed to destroy the British forces, proving that their tactical encirclement no longer worked. These battles signalled the beginning of the end for Japanese dominance in Burma. It showed that the British had adapted, modernised and learned from past failures and helped turn the tide of war in the region. The combination of air supply, strong defensive tactics, leadership changes and jungle warfare expertise made all the difference. So in the end, the British victory in these battles wasn't down to luck. It was about learning from mistakes, adapting to the environment and fighting smarter. It also meant that post-war and the withdrawal from empire wars that we got involved in, that we'd found a new confidence in conducting operations in jungle environments like Malaya and Borneo. And this is where the resurrected SAS cut their teeth and a jungle phase became important on SAS selection. So Kev, what makes the jungle so good for selecting SF soldiers?
I'd say the jungle is good for all soldiers because I think you're either going to love it or hate it. It is the admin, it is the basic soldier. You're learning the very key skills. You're learning navigation, not map reading. You're learning survival skills because the environment is so tough as well, and it's constantly attacking you without an enemy on the ground. So you learn to keep yourself clean, healthy. You're going to deteriorate in the jungle as well. Even in a short period, 4 to 6 weeks, you are going to massively deteriorate. And on SF selection, they will use that jungle as part of that as well, because you have to have an endurance. And another kind of endurance as well. I think we've been to the Arctic, we've been to the desert. They're all very tough environments. But the jungle is the one where it's your own little world. So you might be in a 4 or 5 man patrol, and you might not see anybody for days or weeks as you start patrolling for the jungle. And the possibility is you could do long patrols and never see a soul out there as well. And you're not covering massive distances, especially in secondary jungle. You're not going to cover massive distances. It's very slow. You're only getting a couple of Ks a day through secondary, especially if you've been careful, you've been as tactical as you can be. It can be quite enclosed as well.
Claustrophobic.
Yeah, a little bit, because you can't see that far. You can hear more than you can see. You can smell more than you can see. But it is definitely a hard environment. And I think it's a leveler as well. It's on a level playing field. You've all got the same challenges. Like I say, even if you don't see it, the enemy at all, you're fighting everything else. And every day your admin has to be on the ball, has to be spot on all the time. Where you put your kit in your burger and how you carry your kit. You're going to get sores all over from rub marks as well. You're constantly wet, you're sweating. It is what it is. It is tough.
A guy that we know went on selection, got through the hills phase, he got to the jungle. A lot of time in the jungle, you don't move at night too often. And you do have quite a bit of time where you're in your hammock, time to think.
Yeah.
And he was saying that there have been quite a bit of a couple of weeks into the jungle phase, and he'd made a couple of little minor mistakes on ranges, out on patrol, and they were chewing him up, and it got to him, and he withdrew himself from the course. And they got him out, and he got his debrief, and the OC said to him, what made you decide to bin it? And he told him, and he said, well, we had you down as doing okay. But that is part of the selection.
Yeah.
That mental sort of resilience.
So I think the more soldiers do jungle warfare as a package, actually the skills and drills massively improve. Your CQB is absolutely top if you do really good CQB in the jungle, because it is close. Everything's very, very close. Camp attacks are very, very close. Close target recce's are an absolute nightmare to do in the jungle, especially, like I say, secondary, because you have to get really close to see the target, because the camp might be only 30, 40, 50 meters, 60 meters inside some thick jungle. But to actually see any detail worth reporting,
there, don't you?
You've got to get really close. It actually really is a difficult environment. You got to get close in.
So obviously we can't cover everything that jungle training involves in this podcast. Could be here all day, but just for civilian listeners or people who might not be aware, some of the basic skills you need then are survival skills, learning how to source food and water, build shelters and navigate through dense jungle terrain. Tactics, as Kid's already mentioned, small unit tactics are key. Ambush techniques, close quarter shooting drills, that type of thing. A thread that's been weaving its way through the podcast already is mental and physical resilience. Working in the jungle is exhausting. High humidity, dangerous wildlife, non-stop rain. It really tests you all the time. And navigation. It's a different type of navigation, because going back to that claustrophobia, closed in, you use contours a lot more because you can't really see where you're going. You have no real feel of the lay of the land.
No.
You check pacing.
Yeah, it's pacing and bearings, and we were using prismatic compasses, not just a silver compass. So you're trying to be as accurate as possible, because to try and find something in the jungle, not because you haven't got a long range reference anymore. Especially in some of the training areas, they train you in those really dense ones. You could be 10 meters off and miss the RV point and never know you've missed it as well, because we were taught the RVs were never going to be a track meet in the river or whatever, because the lines of communication were no-nos. So it would be a knoll on a hill, and that's where the RV is. So it would always be something really difficult to find, and it had to be, you do your check pace and you do your distance. You're in the vicinity, and then you do a local recce to find the exact spot between the whole patrol.
So the last skill then is sort of patrol skills, and they are different as well, they alluded to, because you're moving a lot slower.
Yep.
So not only you've got to watch, got to watch where you're placing your feet, because noise travels. You said before, you're not shaking trees and signalling there, you're not disturbing the wildlife. So it's patience as well. I think patience is one of the number one attributes of any soldier working there.
Yeah.
So
and it's exhausting because you are moving
not just
so
physically,
slow.
because you're concentrating.
Mentally,
so
you're continually scanning close, near, and then you're trying to do medium and far, but you're not seeing very far. So you're moving very, very slowly. And you're always, you have to keep changing the lead scout around because after a while they just can't, they have to go to the back again, take it in turns.
You deployed an exercise Iron Lance in Belize in the early 90s, which is a good example of how jungle training was conducted at that time. Can you just talk us through that exercise, Kev?
Yeah, it was a 4-week exercise in the jungle, so it was all going to be in the jungle, and it was supposed to be to produce advanced forces troops for jungle operations in Central America and Belize. So it was run by Hereford at the time. So they ran it. So they only run it one way, which is the same way they run their course in Brunei. But their course is 6 weeks. Ours was only 4 weeks. You basically fly into Belize. You have a 2-day package inside the camp. So you don't get much of acclimatization, but that was just part and parcel of the whole thing. And on the 2 days before we went into the jungle, one day was drawing equipment, and the second day was a swimming test, and we practiced CQB because we weren't allowed to do any physical PT because we just arrived on the airplane. So obviously you get off the airplane from the UK, you open the door, you get hit by the heat and the humidity, you start sweating, you're drawing all your kit, you're doing CQB, you get a basic set of instructions about what's going to happen.
And you're on a 4-man patrol for this, weren't you?
5-man patrol. And it was a 5-man patrol, so 473 put a patrol together because the brigade commander at the time was a gunner, and obviously the BC for the battery that was out in Belize wanted to put a patrol on Iron Lance. Hence why they went to 473 or 73 battery as it was at the time to ask for a patrol, because the skills and drills needed would exceed what a food party would have in small team tactics. And we did this with the recce platoon of the battalion that we were going out with as well. Little did we know, the battalion that was going out had already done loads of pre-work, and most of them had been to Brunei to do the jungle warfare instructors course. So that was their pre-beat up for this whole thing.
Which is a pretty good beat up.
Yeah, absolutely. It was 6 weeks in Brunei doing the jungle warfare instructors course to come and do the Iron Lance course. I was the only one that had been to the jungle before out of the team. The rest of them hadn't. And prior to us flying out, I was down at the Lurb School doing my survival art and why. So I was already losing that essential weight that I would need in the jungle. So I only had about 3 days to try and cram as much food in as possible, because I was going to lose another couple of stone in the jungle, because the jungle is known as the hip and thigh diet anyway, which is never
What
good.
do they do that these days?
Oh yeah, but bloody hell, I was starving when I arrived because I was still catching up on not eating from the survival course. So we did the 2 days, we got all the equipment, everything else. There was a bit of a discussion because the instructors were not sure why an artillery patrol was coming on the course. But it just so happens that one of the guys on the patrol, he bumped into one of the instructors who they both knew from LERP school, because he was an instructor down LERP school. So he realised that we were the same unit who used to go to the LERP courses. So we did CQB, LERP leaders and all the rest of it. So he already knew us. So he just said, oh no, I know where they are. And that all got squashed then. So the Hereford blokes stopped thinking that actually this is going to be the dull patrol, the patrol that no one wants to work with and wouldn't have the skills and drills required. As I say, we were the recce platoon, and the recce platoon's prep was massive for this exercise.
So it's interesting you bring that point up, because that's something that as a unit we always faced.
Yep.
And it happened to me in Bosnia.
Yeah.
When I ended up working with the recce platoon of an infantry battalion.
Yeah.
And you turn up, they're quite rightly, they wonder what you're getting. They're looking at the gunner cap badge.
Yeah.
But once you've proved your skills and drills,
yeah,
it works out fine, Jim.
No, it does. It's just that initial part, because they thought we were a food party, but we weren't a food party. And so,
FO for people forward observation parties.
Yeah,
a party that
works with the infantry
and calls in artillery.
Absolutely. So they've worked with food parties, but not worked with us. And we'd never worked with this battalion either before. We'd had no contacts with them. I'd never worked with them even before being with the Stay Behind element or the Special OP troops or the Special OP battery. So it was interesting dynamic on that part. Then you fly into the jungle first couple of days, and you are taking a massive burden because you've got to carry everything in to set up your base, because you've got to build a base in the jungle. So it's primary jungle, and part of it is secondary. You land on the helicopter, you get off. Each patrol's put into a certain area and told, build your camp, and that'll be your camp for 4 weeks. Even though you're going to do loads.
So each patrol had their own camp. It wasn't like a.
Oh, you're only 10, 15 meters away, but you're all separated.
Right. Okay.
You have to be separated because sometimes you do separate tasks. So, but it was all surrounded, and there was a schoolhouse down the muddy track. There was a river that we could go and use for cleaning when we were back in the camp. And there was a couple of other admin areas and a couple of HLSs as well, one at the top and one at the bottom for resupply. So it was quite well set up. And then there was where the DS were, there was a camp for them as well. Nothing was mega, nothing was far away. It felt like it would have been, especially going on down the tracks. But actually, there were only a couple of 100 meters. It was just the way it felt in the jungle.
Did you make yourself quite comfortable because you build A-frames and that?
Yeah, we built A-frames. So we made it as permanent. It was going to be permanent home for 4 weeks. So you build A-frames. You have a couple of other bashers you put up just so you've got like a communal basher, so for cooking and such like. And that's where all your spare kit was going to stay. So when we went out and we did patrols and stuff, we patrolled with hammocks, not A-frames, so we could have temporary bases out as well. So when you're going out, you go out for 3 or 4 days, you go and live out, and then you come back to this patrol base. And the patrol base is obviously, like I say, it's an A-frame, and it's got some more bits of kit for you. But in real terms, you're just still living in the jungle. There is no difference. You still walk down the track to the river to go and put yourself into the river every so often to clean your clothes and yourself down as much as you can. And that was your only sort of ablutions, or the ablutions down here, and a washing area. And that's where you washed all your kit when you come back in. Where the schoolhouse, where obviously we've got all our lessons prior to going back out onto the tasks and exercises. And that was it really, and the HLSs. So every so often the HLS, a resupply would come in, everyone would get pulled into the HLS to unload equipment, rations and all that sort of stuff, because you couldn't have all the rations there because they just rot out and they draw animals in.
Did you get any fresh of that, or was it all just ORP?
Yeah, every 7 days you have what's called a fresh day, where fresh food arrives. And a fresh day, I'm not going to say it goes non-tack, but they grab all the fresh and you expect it to go away and you cook it straight away, because there is no way to keep it fresh for long. And the idea was to give you some fresh energy back into your body. So we had fresh days, which was probably the best day, because you have a bit of a rum ration with that as well, because you allowed rum rations in the jungle. So the bases are quite basic. The base was quite basic. Still hard to live in, but it actually, after being out on patrol for 3 or 4 days, it felt really comfortable. You got back, you sort yourself out, washed all your kit as much as you can, got into your dry kit, got into your bed.
Or even things like an A-frame makes a difference, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It was the whole thing felt. You soon got used to the difference between the base and on patrol. And that was a 4-week course, and it covered everything from all the basic things. So we did loads of survival, we did loads of tracking as well, massive amount of tracking work, ambushes, all very, very patrol level tactics, and then platoon level tactics as well.
And when you're out on a patrol, did you remember the DS shadowing you each time?
They were with us all the time, yeah. And they were in the patrol, not just shadowing, not walking like 20 metres behind, because they couldn't. If they were 20 metres behind, they'd lose the patrol. So they would just be on, you'd have Tal and Charlie, and then you'd have the DS member. And the DS members all carry shotguns because of the other threats from snakes and such like, because .556 is no good for that. So they'd have to carry shotguns with them as well as part of the safety piece. Patrol skills, navigation. Navigation was everything. Every day was navigation. Whenever you're going somewhere, you had to do navigation. You did the basic sort of stuff you do, like stand twos, all that same stuff. Even in the base, you do stand twos in exactly the same ways you did in basic training. You just didn't have sentries in the main base. On patrol, out on patrol, sometimes you wouldn't have sentries. Like night time, you get loads of sleep, but sometimes you'd be lying on the floor because when you did hard routine or you were close up to what they deemed was the enemy, you didn't put hammocks up. You lay on the jungle floor, which is not the nicest place to be, not the middle of the night. If you're doing the CTR, you're out there all night long. Close target recce. You're out there all night looking around the camp, and you spend all night because nighttime is great because of lights and fires. So you need to do the nighttime part as well as do the daytime piece because sometimes you see more at night.
And just going back to, we mentioned psychological a few times. I remember you telling me on this exercise, the DS wouldn't say things to you, but they would pile the psychological pressure on you by their actions. I remember you saying to me that during a stand two, they'd come round and they'd just touch you on the shoulder.
Yeah,
and that was just to make you put your weapon back on.
Yeah.
They maybe whisper, "Show me a compass."
Yeah.
To make sure you had the bearing on to the ERV and actually how many paces it was to the ERV. So they kept all those little things you had to keep doing.
The whole course was about the basics. It was nothing complicated. There was no GPSs. We had nothing. We just had a radio system. Your kit was constantly being monitored, as like you say. They come around, they touch people to make sure they're wearing the wet kit. They'd check the RVs. They'd tell people to go off to an ERV just to make sure they could find it as well. Because it's all right, everyone's saying, oh, it's over there 50 metres. But we'll find the DS go over there and wait there. Could you go and find them?
And again, that emphasises the close confines of the jungle, because an ERV in northwestern Europe might be 150, 200 metres away, you know what I mean?
Absolutely. I mean, you taught ERV training, that is, you're going through, someone marks an ERV, and everyone, as you're going past it, you look at it backwards, because that's the way you're going to come back to it. So you need to try and recognise it. Well, in the jungle, when you do an ERV, you've really got to work hard to try and figure out where it is. And in the jungle, the ERV is a distance off the point that's given, because you can't be on the same track. So you have to go off it 10 metres.
So when you're patrolling in Europe, you know, every so often you'll stop and the team commander will go around, just check the guys all know where they are, because everybody's got a map and a patrol's job. Yeah. So how often would you do map checks to let everybody else in the patrol know?
Well, not as often as you'd think, because you're going so slow. Lee Scout was working off a bearing, and 2IC would be doing the pacing as well. And the patrol commander would be trying to do both, as well as obviously reading the map. Because Lee Scout can't look at a map.
Yeah, because that's not his job.
No, and also you can't not look forward or cover your arcs all the time, because you could actually just stumble onto somebody. Because like I say, if you're only talking 30, 40 metres, before you know it, you could be onto a sentry position.
And you often read about that in accounts of jungle warfare.
Yeah.
The chance encounter where two patrols, all that massive jungle, two patrols will stumble into each other. Because at the end of the day, you might be staying off tracks, but navigation's navigation.
Yeah. And you end up doing, when you're following contours, you try and stay on the same height and all that sort of stuff to stop the undulating piece. But someone else might be doing exactly the same. But because it is so close, Lee Scout is not looking at anything apart from his compass over his weapon system and is looking forward. The patrol commander's trying to do that with a map, but you're not going to map out all the time, because you're actually working out it's this point to this point. This is the direction we've got to go in. This is the amount of paces, and someone's trying to count the paces as well. You're doing ERVs as you go along as well, and you're doing them quite regular because the distances couldn't be far. Trying to recognise an ERV is really difficult. So you're trying to, when you see a particular tree and you're thinking, we might be able to recognise that again, you're going to give that as an ERV. And everyone's going to try and remember it facing backwards, have a quick look at it and all the rest of it. It is just, like I say, I think it is all the very, very basics. If you can't get the basics right, you'll crumble. If you can't keep on top of your admin, keeping yourself as clean as possible when you can keep yourself clean. Looking after your weapon system, looking after your equipment, because it's all going to get covered in water, because you are going to be soaking all the time. It is rain all the time. If you can't keep your dry kit dry, so at night time you at least got something dry to put on, that you will suffer quickly. And because it is unforgiving, it's not like you can put it in the drying machine, because you go back up to the patrol base eventually after 3 or 4 days. It wasn't like you could hang stuff up. It'll only dry so much, but it's always going to be feeling damp because the jungle is just a very damp and smelly environment. Stuff rots as well quite quickly. So I think it definitely is that it equalises everybody. There were some very, very good people that are really good in camp, and they're very good on basic exercises. They're very good in armoured vehicles and all the rest of it. But when you've got nothing else apart from your 2 feet, what you're carrying on your back, trying to remember all the different rules, the ERV rules, making sure your compass is always set on the latest place. So you go to the schoolhouse and you have to make sure your compass has been adjusted for the ERV. And if you don't, you get caught. You get caught out, because the DS would come out and say, "Show me your compass." And you've got it on the bearing. You had it from your battery area and not from the schoolhouse. So how are you going to get to the ERV? Especially when they bug you at night time. Because night time is when they're going to do it. They're not going to do it during the day where you might be able to have a chance to see something. Or you'll see other people. They're going to do it at night time. There's no torches. And you can't actually follow anyone. And if you're with your mucker, you might be able to get there between years. But you're not going to do it in the day.
And when you were doing live firing, I take it you did some live firing?
Did loads. Most of it was
live
live firing.
Built up with lit single soldier jungle lanes.
Yeah, we did CQB, very quickly moved from 1 man to 2 man. Then we just did contact drills as patrol, and you just did loads of that. So you did blank, a little bit of blank, and you did loads and loads of live as well. And you just piled that on. And also we did camp attacks as well, because obviously this is an offensive organisation. So we've been doing live camp attacks.
So talk us through that sort of final bit of the exercise, because you had to do like an OP and CTRs and stuff. Right?
Yeah, well, one patrol had to go forward, so out of the platoon, we had to move as a platoon towards a camp. So there's a series of patrols have to go out, and someone has to find the camp. It wasn't like you got told where the camp was. You get told roughly where it's going to be. So you're going to have to send patrols out first. So as a platoon, patrols went out to find the camp.
And this was like a systematic area search that you conducted?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so it's all broken down. So it'd be like CTR. There's a systematic way of doing that as well. So someone had to find the camp, and whichever patrol found the camp would have to conduct the CTR, come back, give a...
Sorry, interrupt you. And just so people who don't know, I mean, those type of searches, sometimes you start with a reference point, don't you?
Yeah.
Like a river, and you'll do like a
bounce around,
systematic sweep from
petals or whatever you want to call it, the loop around the camp. You go out, you bounce back into a point where you go, that's as close as I can get. And then once you've got all the information from that angle, you then withdraw, move around to the left or to the right, and probe back in again. And you'll do that as a 360. So that, like I say, some CTRs would take over 24 hours because it took so long to get in. But also when you withdraw, and it takes you that long to get back out to a point where you're no longer you can't be compromised by the camp, then you'd have to move around again a few hundred meters, whatever, probe back in again, because you've got to keep probing, because what you don't want is to have too many surprises. There's going to be camp defences.
Maybe in depth.
Yeah, and also mines. Also sentry positions, because again, everyone's got to think about where are the sentries. Have they got tree sentries, which is something we don't really think about in the European campaign, but actually in the jungle campaign, you put sea trenches in because they can see a little bit further out, and they can watch, as we talked about before, people touching branches and telegraphing their position. They may be able to see something moving. Why is that moving? So they're going to watch that area, and it might be because there's a patrol coming through. Because most animals don't telegraph, because they are in their survival mode as well, because most animals have got something bigger that will hunt and feed off them. So, going back to the camp attack, we had to do all that. Once the CTR was done, whichever patrol had done that would obviously brief back the platoon commander. Platoon commander's orders were, this is where the camp is, we're going to have to do an advance the contact now, and set up as quietly as possible, and then launch an attack onto a camp which had numerous bunkers and
Was there any mortar support or
no, we had no mortar support. There was notional support with plastic explosives. So they set up some bits, so there was going to be a quick barrage as such, but nothing fantastic. Because the only problem with the jungle again is if you get too close to the barrage, because you got to get as close to the camp as possible to launch the attack. If you start bringing real artillery in, potentially you're going to be inside of the killing area because you can't get close enough to let that come in and then take advantage of it.
And we did a really interesting episode with John Tulloch,
yes,
who was in the New Zealand Army and fought in Vietnam, and he describes how to use artillery fire in the jungle.
Oral adjustment.
Oral adjustment. So it's a real skill.
It is, and I think close up, you probably wouldn't want to use it. We were going to use hand grenades, and the reason being is we were going to have to get the start line for the attack was only going to be 20 to 30 metres off the camp. And the idea was to silently approach into that position, hopefully that we don't get seen by the camp, and then launch the attack. Because 20 or 30 metres doesn't sound very far, but as you go back over the fight for the tennis court, the jungle it was a closed-in camp with a lot of rattan fencing. So they built a lot of perimeter protection. They didn't use barbed wire because obviously no one can carry that in. They used local foliage and local materials to help build obstacles. So you're going to have to fight through those obstacles as well. So for this, hand grenades were going to be always to be the answer, and get close in and use direct fire weapons because that way you could suppress. Because again, they're not carrying mega heavy weapons either into the jungle because it's basically whatever you can carry. So you're talking about the heaviest thing would be jimpies.
And what size attack was it? Was it a platoon size?
Platoon times attack.
The command and control over 30 plus blows must have been a nightmare as well.
It was. There was a lot of, when you're looking at the camp planning, so from the CTR, they've got a rough idea of the layout of the camp. So you've got the objectives, the entry points. One patrol's going to have to breach the entry to break into the camp to provide the next patrol in. To attack the first bunker or first holding point or trench, and each position will be like that. And with the flexibility that when you arrive, there's always going to be a surprise somewhere. There'll be another position that no one's thought about. But what we didn't have to worry too much about was no in-depth positions. We knew the size of the camp, but it was going to be real close, and the fire manoeuvre was really close. And so we did the approach. It took us all night to get over I think we had to do 800 meters, which doesn't sound like very far, but through the jungle silently as a platoon, it took us all night. Got to the start point. We laid up until first light because obviously in the jungle it's dark anyway. You can't do it at night time because we had no night optics and they don't work very well in that sort of environment anyway. So you got to wait for it to be light enough to do the attack, and then the attack started. One of the patrols went through, breached the perimeter, started putting suppressive fire down. Another patrol went through. So actually, we're just funneling in one patrol at a time. And as one position was taken, another one would cut the same route, go left or right, and start taking out the next objective.
Did you manage to carry any rehearsals before you did it, or was it just done off what the CPR and the orders?
Absolutely. Because we'd already spent 3 and a bit weeks doing practices. We'd already done a couple of dry runs. We'd done the CTRs and everything like that. And this is an infantry skill anyway. Doing a platoon attack is an infantry skill.
In the jungle as well, it's especially if fighting a coin op, you can't have the luxury of a lot of rehearsals because they might have moved on. So time's of the essence, isn't it?
Well, once we found the camp, we had to approach. We haven't got no rehearsal time. What we've got is a set of orders. We know roughly what the camp looks like. We've got the diagrams. We know what patrol is going to take what piece. However, when you got there, that all changed, as all these things do, because you notice there's another bunker. So what you did was you went for that bunker instead, and then the platoon commander will have to make a decision to bring up another patrol to take out another one. Because I think there was 6 patrols in the platoon anyway, so we could leapfrog over each other to attack. So we did all that. We started the camp attack. First patrol breached beautifully. Second patrol went in, started taking on one of the bunkers, while the first patrol supplying suppression against the whole of the rest of the camp. They fire and manoeuvre. Again, it's not very, the distances aren't great. They start throwing grenades in, posting grenades into that bunker position. They then hold that. They start suppressing. Next patrol bursts through and they start taking the next position. And we were one of those many patrols to just keep rolling in. But as we were doing this, they were simulating casualties. And as they were simulating casualties, the medics were expected to run our IVs into them as well. So we had people...
for real, not just simulate.
Yeah, for real. Because anyone can do it potentially.
Yeah.
And the idea was that under all this pressure, you had someone trying to put an IV in to someone else, and it worked because actually the attack slowed down in places because they were doing first aid on people as well. And that meant that if our patrol had a medic doing first aid on another person, then we only had 3 people left to do the suppressor. So actually, you had to factor all this in, that actually you might lose half a patrol just dealing with the casualty, move them into cover, doing the first aid, trying to run an IV in under these extreme pressure, with the DS putting you under a little bit more pressure as well. He's dying, he's this, he's that. And you've got to suppress an in-depth target, while another patrol burst through, and every patrol was getting a casualty at least, just to get that pressure on the camp attack as well, because obviously there was no two-way going on. And there was simulated explosions. They had obviously C4 going off at the same time just to cause more confusion. And there was a lot of smoke getting thrown around. Because we use smoke as part of our cover, but once you throw it into a jungle, because it's not dissipating as quick because it lays
longer the heat,
it hangs around.
Yeah,
there's no wind.
Through the canopy.
No, there's no wind. There's nothing dissipating it. So actually, it adds more and more pressure onto your patrol. So command and control was really, really tight. So you can think back in the tennis court and all the rest of it. You are in this little world, and the enemy is only 15, 20 meters away. And you're trying to suppress that, while someone else is another patrol. And when I say they're bursting in, they're on the belt buckles, crawling as fast as they can under fire.
So I didn't ask, was this live or was it?
Yeah, all live.
All live.
Yeah. All live. Everything was live. And so everyone's crawling along to get to the next position. And so the fire maneuver became crawling at one stage because you were suppressing the target. The other patrol might be suppressing the target. You got someone trying to go up the centre to attack another one, and they'll be on the belt buckle all their way to get to it, and there'd be belt buckle firing maneuver as well. So everyone was crouching low. It was as realistic as you can do it. And like I say, the casualties, they were whacking IVs into them. You were trying to get tourniquets on the old version of tourniquet, nothing like we've got nowadays. First field dressings, and eventually you starting to drag the casualty back through the entry point to get to another point where we can start looking after them more to get them out of the kill area.
So once you'd done the reorg and got yourself settled, did you then have to make a move out, or did you just consolidate on that position?
No, we had to extract to a helicopter.
With all the casualties?
Yeah.
So how far was that?
Not far. Again, nothing was far because it's a jungle. But you start that process until someone says, that's it. But they want to see the process as well, because I think it was something, I did it in Australia. When I was in Australia, I ran a range, and it was a dry range, contact drills with the Australians.
I know what you're going to do, yeah.
Yeah.
Get them going for miles.
Yeah, because they expected 3-4 bounds. They would stop because that's how they trained.
Yeah.
And so I didn't do that.
Going out the range.
Well, I got them doing it, and then I put one of them on the ground and didn't say nothing. And they had to realise there was a man down. They had to go back, grab the man, and they started dragging him into cover. And I said, well, you've got to drag him in, but you've got to do first aid. And we did another 500 metres bounding. And because it all went quiet, so they didn't have to engage anymore. But I got them to keep bounding. They had to start looking for cover. And every time they were bounding, they were trying to get a first field dressing on. And we did that a couple of times. I said, you've got to get out of the habit of range mentality.
Yeah. Because
people fight the range.
Well, within the boundaries of the range, don't they? Yeah.
And I said, and we did it with blank as well. And I said, with the blank, that opens it up more. You've got to do more. You've got to do it because actually the extraction carries on until you know you're out of the area, because there is going to be a follow-up because you've just hit somebody else. and they're not happy with you any more than you're happy with them. So I broke their range mentality, but they were so used to, because they did 3 or 4 bounds, they started looking at me as though, oh, is this where an index gets called? And I didn't call index. And it was just to change their mindset a little bit. And we did it over a couple of days, and then they got used to the idea that actually index is not where I think it's going to be. It's going to be where Kev thinks it's going to be.
Which could be anywhere.
Yeah, which is the idea, is to keep it going because you're extracting. And I think it was a useful lesson. And I learned that
from that.
Yeah, in the jungle.
So you've got the casualties back to the HLS, and then
index was called.
That was index,
yeah,
was it?
Yeah. Because we were going to move back to the camps, break the camp back down, and then we have to start extracting. Because you can only get 1 patrol on a helicopter at any one time with all your kit. We only had Pumas out there. Did all that, went back, broke everything down, flew back to airport camp, and then spent about 2 days trying to clean all the kit up, hand it all back in, all the stores, try to eat some food, put some weight back on. The jungle clothes we already had, we just exchanged them. They were finished. They were no good anymore, so we handed all our junglies back in, got them replaced with new junglies. But boots were absolutely wrecked, so they were got rid of. Because you had them out there for a month. You're not going to polish your boots when you're out there. There's another thing everyone forgets. All those bases in camp, if you put dubbing or polish on it, the smell of polish will all over the jungle.
Yeah.
And everyone forgets all this because it's a total different environment. You've got to remove those smells. I mean, the only thing I did was brush teeth with a bit of toothpaste, but you have to be really careful. And when doing hard routine, you could brush water. You couldn't use toothpaste because, again, toothpaste gives off a smell because you usually spit it out, and that lingers as well. So it was all that sort of, all the stuff you forget about. And when we do European warfare, it's very different. And it's very different to Arctic warfare, which is, again, very much a survival course, followed by a very small interaction with the enemy, long patrols. But the Arctic is very different because you can't help but leave sign. But the jungle is definitely the one where you're trying to leave the minimum amount of sign as possible. You're constantly doing deception legs. So we talk about looping the P for ambushes and observing who's following you and all that sort of stuff.
But it's amazing how many of those jungle tactics made it way into patrol tactics.
Well, I think
looping the P and all that.
Well, I think for us,
sorry, just the looping the P. Just explain what looping the P is for people.
Yeah, so looping P is you're going along a direction, and you want to know if you're being followed, or you want to do some counter if there's a patrol following you, and you want to do a counter ambush. So as you go and you break track left or right, and you go back on yourself, and you form a letter P, but you're about 15, 20 meters to the flank of the track you just travelled along. So if someone is following you, they're still following your track as they go past where you're hiding up.
Yeah.
So you come back on yourself. These tactics still work. So if you think about the thick forests of Germany, where we weren't using tracks, we were using the jungle, using the forests. Looping the P, the distances were far greater because obviously the visibility was better, but there was still great tactics to use. And I think you can adapt some of the jungle skills. And I think the administration and the carriage of all your equipment and looking for sign as well. Yeah, so I think we used a lot of the tactics we had in the jungle in thick forests of Germany and other places because they do work. Administration, logistics, carrying all your kit, leaving sign, because again, even in those environments, you leave sign everywhere. And if you've got someone who's got a reasonable amount of skill, I mean, in the UK, we have people that are poachers and gamekeepers, and in Germany, we had the forestmeisters who were really good at spotting stuff that shouldn't be there. And we've got to always factor in that actually the other side had people who were as skilled as a forestmeister who could go into a forest and say, well, actually, someone's just been along here.
Well, that's why throughout countless jungle warfare campaigns, you use indigenous people to help you fight alongside that.
What stands out, what doesn't stand out. And I think those skills do translate really well to those. It's part of Europe where we're not in an armoured battle, where we're on foot in some of the really thick German forests. Does work well.
Before we go, we need to talk about the pod title, which is "The Jungle is Neutral."
The title of this podcast will be obvious to many listeners and was the philosophy that was guided by the British officer F. Spencer Chapman during World War II. And his memoir, The Jungle is Neutral, is a testament to endurance, adaptability and survival behind the enemy lines in Malaya. I read this prior to going to the jungle the second time, and I've read it numerous other times. After Japan's invasion of Malaya in 1941, Chapman found himself cut off, forced to adapt to an unforgiving jungle. Rather than resisting its challenges, he learned to master them, moving silently, sourcing food, and using the terrain to his advantage. His survival depended not just on his skill, but on his mental resilience that saw the jungle as a tool rather than the enemy. Chapman worked with the Malayan resistance, leading sabotage missions and hit-and-run attacks against Japanese forces. With no supply lines or reinforcements, his men relied entirely on the jungle. But for all its neutrality, the jungle was an unforgiving teacher. Malaria, exhaustion and hunger were just as lethal as the enemy. And I think we talked about that throughout, that the jungle is a very difficult environment. While The Jungle is Neutral reads as a practical survival guide, it hints at the deeper costs of Chapman's experience, the constant strain of isolation, relentless pursuit, and the hardships of jungle life left lasting scars. Chapman's book became a blueprint for jungle warfare, influencing many military training in later conflicts, from the Malay emergency to Vietnam. His greatest lesson was not only about combat, but about a human adaptability. The idea that nature is not an enemy, but an environment to be understood and mastered. The Jungle is Neutral is more than a war story. It's a study in survival, resilience, and mindset. The jungle does not favour one side over another. It simply exists. Those who learn to navigate its challenges, as Chapman did, prove that endurance is as much mentality as it is physical skill.
And I think we've got that across from your description of your time in Belize there. So a good companion read to this is Jungle Soldier by Brian Moynahan. And surviving the jungle is one thing, but surviving what comes after it is another. And while The Jungle is Neutral tells Spencer Chapman's own story of endurance behind enemy lines, Jungle Soldier goes further and explores the man behind the legend. It's a biography that reveals not just Chapman's wartime heroics, but the psychological toll that followed him long after he left the jungle. And it's really interesting because Chapman is an intriguing character, and Moynahan's book begins long before Malaya, and it traces Chapman's early life as an adventurer, a mountaineer, and an explorer. And he was no stranger to hardship. His love for extreme environments made him an ideal candidate for for special operations during World War II. But it's in Malaya that he faced his greatest test, and living in the jungle for more than 3 years, cut off from conventional forces, Chapman became a symbol of resilience. Yet as Jungle Soldier makes clear, survival came at a cost. Unlike Chapman's own account, which focuses on endurance and adaptability, Moynahan's biography explores the emotional and psychological scars left by years of isolation, combat and disease. Chapman's ability to endure Malaya was remarkable, but Jungle Soldier shows that his struggles do not end with the war, and returning to the UK, he found it difficult to reintegrate into normal life. And that's quite a common theme with a lot of soldiers like him, guys that thrive during wartime but struggle in peacetime.
But they don't find the challenges anymore that they need.
Yeah, what do you do after you've been living in the jungle for 3 years?
I think you've gone to that extreme end of surviving. You're surviving on your wit, and you're trying to come back to a normal job, a normal life, and you can't adapt anymore.
And that's basically in the book. That's spot on, because the very resilience that kept him alive in the jungle left him disconnected from the world around him. Moynahan examines Chapman's post-war years with unflinching honesty. Though Chapman continued work in education and exploration, he was haunted by the weight of his experiences. Depression, loneliness, and the mental toll of prolonged warfare followed him for the rest of his life, and he committed suicide in 1971. Whilst The Jungle is Neutral presents a pragmatic and determined Chapman, Jungle Soldier reveals the full picture, both Chapman's triumphs and his struggles, and it gives context that Chapman often downplayed in his own account and painted a more complete portrait of a man shaped and ultimately broken by war. Despite its tragic ending, Jungle Soldier reinforces Chapman's place in military history. His survival skills influenced future jungle warfare training. and his story remains an example of both extraordinary human resilience and long-term consequences of extreme endurance. It's a deeper, more personal look at Chapman, not just as a soldier, but as a man who lived through the impossible, only to find himself lost when the war was over. What's interesting in the book as well when you read it is, like a lot of these characters, he's a bit of a mixed bag. For example, he kept a diary, and Moynahan sort of hints that he was already thinking about his legacy post-war, and that was one of the reasons he kept the diary. And a lot of the people he was in the jungle with were saying to him, there's a lot of compromised material in there, you shouldn't be carrying that, but he still did it. So it's quite interesting to see that side of him that also doesn't come through in the book.
The war became, I'm trying to find the right words.
It's like they're attuned to it. They fight. It's like Paddy Blair Main.
This becomes their pinnacle of life.
Where are you going to go after that?
Yeah, this naturally it becomes their natural environment. It becomes where they become the most they're ever going to become is that war. And dare I say it, if some of them stayed in the armed forces, taught what they taught, and then went on to other wars, it would have suit their mental place.
So the likes of Chapman probably wouldn't have fitted in well to conventional
peacetime armies. No, and this is always going to be the challenge. I think Second World War, unconventional warfare was a massive growth industry during the Second World War, more than any other war, because we were short of men, short of equipment. We needed to take the fight to the enemy, even in small doses. One, to say that we're still fighting, we're still in the fight, encourage the Americans into the war and other allies, to show the public we're still in the fight as well. You know, whether we're sending a bomber command over Germany or France, bombing military stations, doing raids in Norway, raids in France with the commandos, or operations elsewhere around the world. We had to show we're still in that fight, and we were buying ourselves time and building that experience up as well, because obviously from Dunkirk, you know, morale was obviously going to be extremely low. People are going to be more worried about the invasion. A lot of our equipment are lost. So how do you make small groups of people deliver more effect? SOE was formed out of this as well by Churchill, said, you know, make Europe ablaze, and that expanded out to other operational areas as well, with great deal of success for a small amount of people. And you needed people who were unconventional in their thinking, not necessarily career soldiers. They were given that free rein to do more as well. They were never going to fit into a peacetime army either when they come back. Was there a place for them, in a peacetime army? Potentially there was, if the army had the imagination, but I don't think it did.
And that's a great point, because the army, despite these units coming to the fore in the Second World War, the army couldn't get rid of them quick enough in 1945.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's why they disbanded the SAS. It wasn't until Malaya that the SAS came back into...
Well, it disbanded loads and loads of elements. I mean, it kept a very small commando force. Yeah, everyone forgets the commando forces during the Second World War were massive, and the commando forces were originally started by the army, not the Royal Marines. Royal Marines were their own identity still. So we got rid of a lot of those sort of successful organisations, and we lost a lot of that skill set. I think it's because the army, peacetime, frowns upon what they deem as mavericks. Applaud them in World War II because they needed those people, but none of them would survive a peacetime command.
And actually, so we go back to the first few episodes of this podcast where we talked about the raising of our stay behind role.
Yeah.
And you use that term there, the army frowns upon. Well, certainly Royal Artillery frowned upon our unit in a lot of respects and didn't really embrace it. Now, I'm not comparing us to any special forces unit. That's not what we're trying to do there. But what I'm saying is, anything that's unusual, a very conventional regiment of the Royal Artillery struggled with what we were doing.
And it was frustrating because it was a brigadier from the ex-gunners, or ex-brigadier who was ex-gunner, and the BC that wanted the patrol to go on Iron Lands because they needed that skill set to make the gunners look better, because we got best patrol out of the whole thing as well. We already had a lot of those skills that you needed for the jungle, although we didn't do the jungle warfare instructors course, because our small team tactics from the stay behind course, from lurk courses, were very much attuned to following the same rules as they do in the jungle. Because we all used the same rule book, which was Roger Ranger's rules. They were using the jungle exactly the same as they were using the swamps of America, as they were used on the stay behind course as well. Those rules were very, very basic, and that's where the strength comes from. It's all about the basics. If your kit's good, you know where it all is, you haven't lost anything, you don't leave sign, you don't walk down the track, you don't go and drink, sleep next to a river and all the rest of it, you will survive, and enables you to be able to have an advantage because you can fight. Yeah, I think the Maverick the regular forces, they may be changing a lot more now because they need more agile than they ever have been. As an organisation, the army wants more from its 70,000 troops. But after post-Second World War, the command wanted to go back to pre-1939 armies.
Well, there's two parts, wasn't there, post-45? There was the withdrawal from Empire battles.
Yes.
Wars, which were typically a lot in the jungle, but also a place like Aden.
Yeah.
But the main thrust and the main focus was on heavy armoured formations in northwestern Europe to keep the Soviets out.
Yeah. If you look at a real good successful star of an operation that got kiboshed by the Americans, when you look at the Suez Canal, the joint French and British operation there was a huge success. Light forces gunning and took over Suez Canal, held it. It was politically
misjudged.
Maybe. I don't know. But the Americans didn't like it. We had to all leave. But actually what you proved was light forces can do some... If you've got imagination as well, and you've got a bit of daring, and you've got the political will to force project people in, you can deliver. The 1946 army, before we went into the Cold War, you're right, they wanted to get rid of those characters. Wingate would never have survived in a peacetime army, even though his imagination helped develop the Chindik piece, and obviously influenced the Merrill Marauders as well, with the composite brigades that the Americans used. And other organisations would have been looking at that as well. They just don't survive that new peacetime army as it was deemed. And then when you move to Korea, you need that independent, agile thinking again. But we'd lost a lot of that, I imagine, because a lot of those other people that left the armed forces and gone back into civilian street, a lot of them struggled.
Right, that's it. Thanks for listening. Your continued support and suggestions, please keep them coming, and our email and social media links are at the bottom of the show notes. You can find all the usual suspects, including Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. If you've downloaded from iTunes and like the podcast, it'd be great if you could leave us a review there, or anywhere you get your podcasts from. And thanks again to Nick Beale for his continuing help and offering technical support through his company ISAR, and we'll see you next time on The Unconventional Soldier.